Okay, great. Let's kick off then. So again, welcome to the Week of Action 2025 on Sport and Refugees. This is an annual event organized by Sport and Dev, the International Platform on Sport and Development, and the Sport for Refugees Coalition, which is co-convened by the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, the Olympic Refuge Foundation under the IOC, ORF, and the SCORT Foundation, who are all on the call today and have put in a huge amount of work to make this happen behind the scenes. And I'd like to thank all of them for all of that hard work. We did a workshop earlier this week on sport in cities and municipalities. This is the second workshop of the Week of Action, and we concurrently have a number of other initiatives running, which we'll get to. Today, we're here to talk about sport against hate, how to tackle discrimination and hate speech in and through sport towards refugees and those who are forcibly displaced, a critical issue. If you just arrived, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, your location, and answer the warm-up question in the Mentimeter, which is what can we do to tackle hate speech and discrimination towards refugees in and through sport? And together we'll build a word cloud with your answers from this question. You can keep answering this separately as we move through today's webinar, and we will share the word cloud after the introductions from everyone. So this is the agenda for today. Hopefully most people have arrived. I see some people are still joining, but we'll move into the substance. And with introductions, we'll then have a panel discussion. And we've got some fantastic panelists that I will introduce shortly. We'll then have the time to move into 3 different breakout rooms. And you can choose your own breakout room, which will be moderated by one of the panelists. We'll come back and report back to plenary from those breakout rooms. And then we will conclude and finish. We'll try our best to stick to time. We're aware everyone's busy, and we hope that you engage as much as possible in this webinar. We're trying our best to make it as interactive as possible. So what is the Week of Action? The Week of Action, which is happening this week, is an annual event by both the SfRC, Sport for Refugees Coalition, and Sport and Dev, which creates a place and space for the coalition members, of which there are 100, and other parties, anyone to engage with the topic of inclusion of refugees in and through sport. There's more displaced people in the world than ever. We know that this is increasing on a daily basis with rising conflicts and crises. The need is greater than ever. Rising challenges across the world, including increased hate speech and discrimination on multiple fronts. So it's really never been more critical than right now to consider how sport can contribute to addressing hate speech and discrimination towards refugees. What is the best role that sport can play in making the world a better place for those who are forcibly displaced? The information and the experiences gathered today and throughout this Week of Action will feed into the 2025 high-level officials meeting, which takes place at the end of this year in Geneva between the 2 global refugee forums. So the inputs you provide and the call for articles which we're running will be used to inform the high-level officials meeting. And so this year's Week of Action, we're focused on 2 themes, which are actually cross-cutting pledges as well for the Global Compact on Refugees. One is bridging communities, the role of cities in sport for inclusion. And we did a webinar on this on Tuesday. And today it's about sport against hate, tackling discrimination in and through sport. These are 2 separate pledges under the Global Compact on Refugees. And we are looking at how sport can support these pledges. There is a pledge on sport, which the coalition has led, but it's equally important to consider how can sport contribute to other pledges. After all, sport for development is intersectoral and seeking to achieve outcomes in other areas. At the same time, we've also launched a call for articles on sportanddev.org, which means that you can submit your thoughts, your views, your news linked to these 2 themes, cities and municipalities, and tackling discrimination in and through sport. for those forcibly displaced. And you can do this in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. And my colleague John, I'm sure, is sharing those links in the chat. We've already received a number of articles, but it's free to submit articles on Sport and Dev. You can get published on the global platform. You can contribute to the debate and dialogue and create some visibility for your work. So I'd encourage you to please share the call for articles. Please submit your news, views, and information via sportanddev.org and in multiple languages if possible. This webinar today, unfortunately, is only in English, but we will be looking at ways we can make these even more inclusive, because we recognize language is an important factor in this world, and that the sport for development sector has been Anglophone and North-driven, and we're working hard to address that in our work with the Sport for Refugees Coalition. So that's an overview of the week of action happening right now, right here. It'll run for the rest of this week, and the call for articles will continue for a little bit longer. So we encourage you to all get involved and spread the word. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Katie Drew, who is an expert on information integrity, misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, who will just provide a brief overview of these concepts and what they mean. So over to you, Katie.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Sorry, this is a really full slide, and don't worry, I won't read it out sort of word for word. But I just wanted to sort of shape how UNHCR is sort of putting a chapeau over this area of work as information integrity. And so this really is looking at how strong the ecosystem is, the information and communications ecosystem is, to allow people to have access to information and also the right to freedom of expression, and that they can access information that's reliable, free from discrimination and hate, but they also feel that they have a role to play in contributing to that ecosystem positively in a safe and secure environment. So you might hear the word information integrity, and that's the work stream that I work on for UNHCR. So behind this are a number of other sort of words that sort of come out, or terminologies that we use. And what I think we need to sort of just concentrate on today is the distinction between misinformation and disinformation. They can both cause harms, for sure, but it all depends on the intent. So sometimes you might receive something on your phone and you might share it, and then afterwards you find out that it wasn't true. And we have that all the time, particularly around maybe health information or information about, even if it's something that you think is innocuous, a new restaurant opening that hasn't actually opened or something like that, and you share it on. If you didn't intend to share the information to cause harm, if you didn't, if you didn't know it was inaccurate, you were just sharing it, that's misinformation. If you share a piece of information and you know it might cause harm and you know it's inaccurate, that's disinformation. And that's where we start to see sort of, there is an intention behind it, often not for good intents to share this piece of disinformation. A lot of this can actually also lead to hate speech. And just to sort of highlight that, actually, interestingly, there is no legal definition of what is hate speech. And there's quite a high threshold in terms of what hate speech is, in terms of, this is what we would need to have. It would need to have a form of communication, discriminative language, and definitely attacking or targeting or, picking on a particular group or person on the basis of their identity, their religion, maybe their nationality, color, or other identity facts. Not everything that is hate speech, that we reach that definition, but doesn't mean it's not harmful. So a lot of content that we see online, circulating online, is harmful content. We're just not able to sort of give it that sort of high level of definition and classify it as hate speech. But just to sort of say that I think that we just really need to be aware that it's any form of communication that is using, negative, discriminative, that's not very easy to say, discriminatory language against a specific person or group on the basis of an identity feature. And that's what we're going to have a look at today. And obviously, I mean, as we talk about sort of today's definitions, we're really sort of thinking about that definition is related to maybe someone's displacement status, for example. I'll hand back now. I'm very happy to answer more questions on this. We didn't want to get too deep into the terminology, and sorry for the busy slide. I think that's the last of the lecture. For more interaction from now on. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katie. And yeah, great to have someone who's an expert on these. I definitely didn't know all the differences between them myself. So it's wonderful to have this laid out, and, you know, obviously increasingly important as well in today's context and the growing rise of, you know, misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech online, and the difficulty with discerning what is real and what is not. These concepts become more and more important. And that's also why one of the breakout groups actually will be talking about the online space and how we address, you know, misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech online, which we see as a, you know, an increasing risk for those forcibly displaced and everybody working within this ecosystem. So yeah, great to have that summary, and we'll get more information from you in the panel. I'll now hand over to Alfonso Redondo from the Olympic Refuge Foundation, because, and there's a really exciting opportunity that this is not only a webinar and a talk shop, but there's actually a collaborative action grant that has been launched by the Sport for Refugees Coalition and supported by the Olympic Refuge Foundation, where there's an actual opportunity to apply for funding to tackle some of these areas that exist. And so I'll hand over to you, Alfonso, to provide a bit more information on this exciting opportunity.
Yes, great. Thanks, Ben. So yeah, just before I get into the grant, just to give a little bit of background on the Sport for Refugees Coalition for those that may or may not be aware. So the coalition's co-convened by the UNHCR, the Olympic Refuge Foundation, which I represent, and the SCORT Foundation. And it brings together more than 140 entities from around the world in the fields of sport, civil society, public and private sectors, and the aim is to extend sport for displaced people around the world. And the coalition members have committed to supporting the Global Refugee Forum Multi-stakeholder Pledge on Sport for Inclusion and Protection. And if you're not a member, and if you want to find out more on how you can get involved, you can contact us at contact@sportcoalition.org. And so, yeah, we're super excited to launch, as part of the Week of Action, the Sport for Refugees Coalition Collaborative Action Grant, which is funded by the Olympic Refuge Foundation. So the idea of the grant is to encourage partnership and innovative initiatives among coalition members and relevant entities from the Global Refugee Forum multi-stakeholder pledging area. So ultimately, to be eligible to apply for this grant, the submitting organization must be a coalition member, and they must be working in partnership with another coalition member or another organization from the relevant Global Refugee Forum pledges. So organizations who are applying should demonstrate refugee engagement in planning and implementation, and the proposed initiative should align with one of the two Week of Action themes. So the topics that we will be discussing today, but also the topics that were discussed on Tuesday this week, more closely aligned to integration in cities and municipalities. So up to 4 concepts will be selected of up to $50,000 US. And if you scan the QR code, you can get more details, deadlines, T's and C's and the fine print and all the rest of it. You can also find the link in the chat. So yeah, it's a great opportunity. It's what we're trying to do with the coalition, which is to get organizations to work together for the benefit of displaced people through sport. So yeah, take a look, and we look forward to reviewing your concepts. That's it from me.
Great, thanks, Alfonso. And yeah, I think a huge shout out to the Olympic Refuge Foundation and the coalition for making this possible, quite quickly, and great way for organizations to raise resources for their work. We know resources are more constrained than ever. We know the challenges are greater than ever. But also that there's, a huge opportunity, right, to use sport in a constructive way to support displaced people. So I encourage you to look at these action guidelines, the collaborative action grant and the guidelines. If you're not a member of the SfRC, you can join by taking the pledge, and you can get more information on that by contacting the coalition, and of course partnering with other entities to address these pledges. So yeah, fantastic work, and important as we look to scale the use of sport in inclusion and in tackling discrimination linked to these two different pledge areas. We'll now move on quickly to see what does the Mentimeter say. So John, perhaps I'll stop sharing and you want to share your screen and give people an idea of what the Mentimeter is showing. And I think you are muted in case you're speaking. Okay, great. So this was the question we asked. We've had 28 responses on the question, what can we use to tackle hate speech and discrimination towards refugees in and through sport? We'll keep this Mentimeter going until the end of the workshop. John can pop the link in the chat again. But yeah, we can already see some useful contributions around involving the local community, combating stereotypes, education and awareness raising, building partnerships, breaking down barriers, collecting data, which, and making the case through data and M&E, monitoring and evaluation, and building positive narratives, which is something we'll also discuss a little bit further in the panel. Like I said, that Mentimeter will remain open for the rest of the webinar, and so we encourage you to please contribute to it. Please share it and please get involved. And we'll come back to it, and we will again use these inputs as discussed to feed into the high-level officials meeting and all of the other forums that are coming up, as well as the call for articles. So now we'll move onto the panel discussion, and really excited to have three really strong panelists with us here today. Sandrine Tong, who is the Broadcast Services and Olympic Projects Senior Director at Warner Brothers Discovery. She works in the media rights team of the sports entity and leads Olympic-related projects and manages the relationship with the International Olympic Committee. Before joining Warner Brothers Discovery Sports, she worked for 9 years at the IOC in the communications department and was part of the team that launched and supported the very first refugee Olympic team during the Rio Olympics in 2016, which has now become such an important feature of the Olympics. So welcome, Sandrine, and we look forward to hearing from you. We've also got Katie Drew, Emergency Lab Manager, communicating with communities, UNHCR Innovation, who's presented a little bit already on information integrity. And she works on this topic, including combating online hate speech at UNHCR. She brings experience of strengthening community-driven solutions and has nearly 20 years of work experience supporting digital inclusion and resilience. And at UNHCR, she'll shape global efforts to reduce online harm and promote social cohesion, bringing a blend of policy advocacy and field experience to building safer digital spaces. And last but not least, we have Piero Power, Executive Director of the FAIR Network, Football Against Racism in Europe, and he's the Executive Director of this network, which operates in 41 countries, tackling discrimination and exclusion in football. He's also got over 20 years experience of working within football as a campaign and communication specialist with significant governance experience, including working with national and European level governments, governing bodies, NGOs, sports rights holders, brands, players, and regulators. And so we're delighted to have him here with us today, and I'll share my screen and give you a bit of a view of our three panelists. Katie from UNHCR, Sandrine from Warner Brothers Discovery, and Piara Power from the FAIR Network. So we will engage now in a panel discussion where we'll ask them some questions and get their responses. If you have any questions during this time for any of the panelists, or any questions related to anything that's been presented, including the grant opportunity by the ORF, please put those in the chat and we'll try to get to them afterwards. Following the panel discussion, we'll go into breakout rooms, in 3 separate breakout rooms, each led by one of the panelists, before coming back to the plenary for final closing. So again, pop your questions in the chat, please engage. The Mentimeter will stay open until the end of this webinar. So if you haven't filled it out or you want to do more there, please go ahead and do so. Okay, so I'll stop sharing my screen, and my colleague John will help spotlight the relevant speaker as they come online. So we'll start off. Well, firstly, great to have such great experts here. Piara coming from the football against exclusion space, Sandrine from the broadcasting space, and of course Katie from the UN Refugee Agency. We're going to start off with Piara. And I mean, Piara, how have you seen and how would you say hate speech plays out in sport, and specifically, I guess, in football towards refugees or those forcibly displaced?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for the question, Ben, and great to be here. Great to see so many good people here. I think for me, for us as an organization, our monitoring work shows that there is unfortunately often a direct connection between football and hate speech, or as some people might want to see it, football and sectarian behavior on the basis of club allegiances that often spills over into discrimination. And we see this every week. We see this around the world, particularly in Europe and Latin America. And I guess the issue that actually does concern us, it's one of the most concerning issues, is the number of hate speech incidents we have against refugees as a whole. So, for example, let me give you a couple of examples of how this plays out. And it isn't dissimilar to other forms of hate speech in football, but these examples show how it can be targeted. And about, I think it was about 8 months ago, 10 months ago, I'm actually in Poland at the moment, in Krakow at the EU Sport Forum, and in Warsaw in June 2024, Legia Warsaw fans unfurled a giant banner, which on the face of it had a welcome message for refugees, but at the bottom had all sorts of hateful insinuations and direct messaging. There was chanting during the match against refugees, so much so that the UN Refugees Office in Warsaw issued a statement reminding people that sport should not be used for hateful intent. And as those of us in the UN or have worked in the UN system know, that it's very rare for a UN office to do that. So it gives you a measure of the seriousness of that. And that is the sort of thing we've seen a great deal in Europe in particular, but also in Latin America, and in Europe particularly in the post-2015 period, when we had the sort of Syrian refugee move towards Europe to escaping from the civil war in Syria, where we often had a mix of anti-refugee sentiment and Islamophobic sentiment, with messages that were often disguised but had a very clear intent, and often were about preserving the culture of Europe, the Christian culture of Europe, and alleging that refugees giving sanctuary to individuals who were fleeing from war would somehow change the culture of Europe and change the religion of Europe. So the message is often said very directly in giant banners, keep Europe Christian. Now, if you read that, you can't necessarily see that it's directed at refugees, but it very much is so. And we see that in professional football. We often also see that in amateur football. And a good example here would be a club called Liberty Nantes, who are a Rome-based team, the first Italian refugee-only team. And that sort of hate speech played itself out through teams that they would play against, abusing their players. Their social media, Facebook postings would often be defiled with refugee hate. And often people would just refuse to play against them as a refugee team. So that's two very quick examples. And I think that there's a whole lot of others. And often these examples are, when they're in person, when they're in real life, are following a sort of populist political agenda. So another example I could give is in the last year or so in Scotland, where Rangers Football Club fans were singing "Stop the Boats," which is a reference to the refugee asylum seeker boats that cross from France into southern England. And many of those people living in Glasgow who were Rangers fans would have no connection with refugees. It was just a reflection of the sort of populist sentiment that decries the presence of refugees in the UK. And we see that being played out time and time again. Football is a mass spectator sport. And as a mass spectator sport, people feel that it's an appropriate space to put across hateful messages. And it's something that I think we, unfortunately, in the years have seen no let up on. We thought that actually that as the refugee debate becomes more sophisticated, as people become more accepting, as people live alongside people, that we would see a diminishing in the levels of that hate, but there is no such thing. I know we're going to talk about the online space in a bit more detail later on, but that's also a very significant issue around football. Online hate towards players of color, towards women, towards those that are alleged to be from the LGBTIQ community are very, very common. And it's very easy, as we know, for people to take to social media and put out a few hateful tweets or posts and then go unsanctioned and unpunished because of that. And of course, this is down to some of the wider trends we're seeing here with unmoderated social media platforms. And sometimes, let's face it, the owners of those platforms encouraging that sort of hate as well. So that's a very quick overview of the sort of hate speech that we see generally, and then specifically towards refugees, and often on 2 or 3 levels, against individuals and communities as refugees, but also an attack on their religion, also often an attack on their social status.
Thanks, PR, and yeah, really comprehensive overview, and as you say, very worrying that you've seen no let up over the years and possibly an increase in recent times. So my apologies, FAIR is not Football Against Racism in Europe. It's the FAIR network, which has been established since 1999, so running for over 25 years, working in the space. Equally important is obviously the work of broadcasters here, and how the media represents refugees and those forcibly displaced. So Sandrine, working for Warner Brothers Discovery, which has such a massive global audience, I think everyone's heard of Warner Brothers before, is how do you ensure your broadcasts promote positive representation of diverse communities, including marginalized and displaced groups? Over to you.
Thank you. Well, for those who are not familiar with the size of the media group, before I address the question, maybe I can tell you a little bit more about what we do. So we are a global media entertainment company, and we've got a line of work from films that you are familiar with to a multitude of TV channels across the world. Can be news channels, sports channels, thematic channels, free-to-air channels, pay TV channels. We also have streaming tools such as Discovery Plus, Max in certain territories. So we are a decent sized media, and we do have a voice and a strong voice, and we can share messages. And it's important to note as well that diversity, equality, and inclusion has been part of our DNA for a very long time. And in the sports part of the business, we launched a program called WBD sports together, and where, I mean, everybody knows the power of sport in this group, and we decided to unlock the power of sport. And through our reach of our sports channels, such as Eurosport or TNT Sports, we had the opportunity to drive meaningful change in society. And we are also the home of the Olympics in 49 territories in Europe. And so we work very closely with the IOC, and one of our key projects under this umbrella was to create mass support for the IOC Refugee Olympic team. So I worked very closely with Alfonso and everybody at the IOC and the Refuge Foundation. And maybe because video speaks better than words, if we can launch the video to tell you what we did.
All right, just give me 1 second.
Okay.
Having no national team to belong to, having no flag to march behind. These refugee athletes will be welcomed to the Olympic Games with the Olympic flag and with the Olympic anthem.
Moteur demandé.
We can be heroes. Sport has the power to celebrate human achievements. Refugee athletes fought harder and dreamed bigger. So we crafted a campaign to build a home crowd for the Refugee Olympic team. Because more than any other team, they deserve a chant. We created a cover of David Bowie's Heroes for fans to support them.
Je pense qu'on peut mettre un peu plus d'intensité sur ce passage.
Ah oui.
Bien tous ensemble. Just for one day.
And we shot them in empty stadiums to emphasize their need for a home crowd. Harnessing our international reach to the widest possible audience. We called on all Olympic fans across the world to join their voices to the home crowd.
We're proud to support the Refugee Olympic team.
We're here behind you.
Let's all chant for the Refugee Olympic team.
Let's all chant for the Refugee Olympic team.
And let's all cheer
alla squadra olimpica dei rifugiati.
We can be heroes.
We can be heroes.
Guyyaa tokkoof qofa goota ta'uu ni dandeenya.
Thank you. So Eurosport became the media cheering the team because they didn't have a home broadcaster either. And so we leveraged the full scale of our TV distribution and we distributed the campaign. We did different waves of campaigns before the games, during the games. We also produced loads of editorial content. We told their stories on our sports channel, but also on CNN, which is part of the group. And we followed them when the team was nominated, in their training camps, during the games. They came to our studio shows, and the result of the campaign was, we were really, really pleased with the result. So we reached 78.6 million reach for the marketing campaign. 60 million people were reached through PR and communication because the entire group got behind the campaign, and we also had nearly 3 million video views on social. So we were very happy about it, and I guess it was our way of promoting positive representation through these stories. I mean, we tell those stories every day. I mean, we cover inclusion every day, but on this particular topic, we decided to focus on the athletics performance of the athletes as well. it was important to tell their stories, so that we provided them a platform to tell their stories, but we also wanted to focus on their athletics performances. This was very important for us. And you know, beyond the fact that we wanted to bring global attention to the refugee crisis, we stayed focused on the fact that we are a sports broadcaster and we're here to tell stories. We're here to share human stories. And what a better way than just highlight the athletics performances.
Great. Wow. Thanks so much, Sandrina. Yeah, that was an amazing video, and probably would have got a full round of applause if we'd been sitting all together in an auditorium. But yeah, wonderful, and yeah, amazing work and amazing reach, of course, through your global channels to promote this positive representation of forcibly displaced, who, as you say, have had to work harder, have had to overcome, you know, greater barriers to even get to the Olympics or even close in the first place. Someone who knows about these barriers and working with displaced communities is Katie. And so, Katie, can you maybe share the initiatives you're working on in leading to combat hate speech against displaced communities, such as the Innovation Project that I know you're doing here in my home country of South Africa?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And it's a really fantastic video. I was just sort of thinking there's probably not a dry eye in the house now after watching that. I don't know whether it's the music or the content, but it's fantastic. So it's a hard act to follow, I think. But just to say, as I said earlier, we have a work stream in UNHCR called Information Integrity, and picking up on the point that Piara made earlier, in the sense that we really are noticing that social media is fueling these really harmful narratives about displaced communities, and that we really need to start as an organization thinking about ways in which we can address this. Sometimes it can feel like a really, you know, mammoth task. Where do we start? We look at the millions and millions of likes and shares of hateful content, and what can we do to try and sort of, you know, mitigate that or counter that. So we have a work stream called Information Integrity, and one of the projects that I'm working on is funded by the Norwegian government, particularly looking at innovation and thinking about how we can try new approaches to try and address misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech. I know that there's a few people on today from South Africa, so I don't want to speak on your behalf, but just to sort of say, in South Africa, we do see a really sort of quite strong anti-foreigner sentiment, and this has, you know, historical roots for sure, but has been proliferated online, and there have been calls to action for, you know, offline violence against forcibly displaced people and migrants in South Africa, and this is really sort of manifesting in harm. We've seen, you know, businesses destroyed, houses burned. And in one instance, or at least one reported instance, someone has been killed as a result of this violence. So in South Africa as well, we see a real sort of, you know, anti-foreigner sentiment. It doesn't distinguish between, you know, who is a refugee, who is a migrant, why have people come to South Africa, you know, and there's a lot of links of, you know, foreigners bring criminality, also that they are taking jobs away from South Africans. So there's big narratives here, and you know, if we try and address these large narratives, like what can we do to try and help people sort of navigate this space and understand what is true, what is fact, what is fiction. And so interestingly, we were working with the Human Sciences Research Council in South Africa, and they shared with us some research that said that people thought that there was there's over 20 to 30 million refugees, migrants and refugees in South Africa. Now, if you think about that, that's almost half the size of the population. So obviously it's a perception that's you know, it's a perception that's there, but it's not true. So we need to try and support people to sort of navigate the fact from the fiction. And one of the ways that we wanted to do this was to try and sort of raise what we call digital resilience, and have specifically worked with students in schools to try and help them better navigate the online space. And we're using a concept called pre-bunking, which can sound a little bit sort of faddy or technical, but it's an approach to try and warn people that online they might be manipulated. Online you might be exposed to hateful content. People are trying to maybe, you know, manipulate you for political will or for financial goods, you know, and that we really have to try and be very, very discerning and question everything that we see online and think of ways in which we can sort of safely navigate this space, particularly when there's a lot of toxic content. And so we're trying to find ways of, rather than lecturing students, you know, this is what you should think, be careful online, ways in which they can explore how to model positive behaviors, be a positive online citizen, amongst their peers, discuss issues. And so we've actually developed a board game. It's in very early phases at the moment, but it's a board game, an actual analog, physical, old school board game the students are playing in schools in order to understand the role that their online behavior has in terms of offline harms that this might have against you know, foreigners in South Africa. And in that game, we talk about some of the reasons why people might have come to South Africa. And so people get to walk in the shoes of many different characters. You might have moved internally within South Africa because your family wanted to send you to an urban center because you had better opportunities at school, or you might have come from the Congo and you know, fled violence there, or you might have come from, you know, surrounding countries. And the idea is to try and build on that sort of sense of solidarity. And I think this speaks a lot to the video that Sandrine just also shared as well, that importance of sort of saying, you know, how do we fight hate is to really try and strengthen solidarity and really try and bring people to understand that we have different backgrounds, but there's a lot of sort of, you know, similarities that we have in terms of experiences, and we're actually not so different, and unpacking the reasons why people are where they are. And so it's early days, but we've really seen that actually at the end of the game, people are the students who have been playing it, 14 to 18-year-olds, much more likely to demonstrate positive attitudes towards refugees. And so one of the questions that we ask is, you know, refugees and migrants are the source of the you know, primary source of crime in South Africa. And actually we've seen that people are sort of distancing themselves from that sentiment and sort of understanding that there, you know, that there are definitely nuances to the conversation, and that maybe there's been a lot of scapegoating on certain communities in South Africa, for example, particularly online. And so, I mean, just to sort of say that that's obviously a very classroom and not sports-based example, but I do feel that there's a lot of similarities between what we're trying to do in the sports for development world and sort of building communities, bringing communities together, making space for dialogue, that I think is really very relevant for our work. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Some really interesting insights and creative use of a board game as well in this day and age, which is incredible. And, you know, depending on one's definition of sport, but you know, sport for development actors take quite a wide definition of sport that includes indigenous games, board games, other types of games. So, you know, could classify sport for development as well. And I think also just important to recognize here, you know, that we're not saying that sport's a panacea. You know, we're not saying sport just solves all problems. And it's the way, okay, it's how. PR will tell you this, people will tell you this, is how sports programs are organized, right? The sport program can be inclusive, it can be exclusive. It can reinforce harmful gender stereotypes or stereotypes against refugees, but it can also challenge them. So I think we need to be mindful that sport, you know, does have power and sport can, but it's really how sport programs are designed, delivered, and evaluated, and that we need to be targeted, balanced, and realistic in how we use sport, and not claim it's a you know, one size fits all solution, but in what circumstances can it be most effective, and how can it be used? How can it be harnessed to support displaced people? So on that note, PR and given your extensive work, I mean, there are a lot of different initiatives, right, working to combat discrimination, hate speech through sport. And can you maybe share some of the successes, some of the challenges, and you know, can these models be scaled or replicated in other regions?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks again for coming to me. No, I think that we have to be confident that when we see hate speech, that there can be recourse to the law, firstly, to try to deal with that. And secondly, that there are community responses that can be mobilized to respond. Now, of course, the law is difficult to mobilize in very many territories. It's difficult when you see law enforcement and politicians turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to hate speech. But certainly in many of the territories that we've come across, whether it's across Europe, across the Americas specifically, where the law, there is a law, firstly, usually against forms of hate speech and discrimination. So I think we must always use that. And we have lots of groups who have been working with groups of progressive lawyers who are working with advocacy groups to realize their rights under the law to fight back against hate speech. And I think that's significant. And there are some territories where you can do that as a grouping of individuals, whether that grouping is on the basis of race or ethnicity, or as another organizing group. I think that's really significant. Laws exist. People have fought for those laws to be on the statute books, and we have to use them. And the case that I mentioned earlier on with Liberty Nantes, that's a really good example of a grassroots group who understand the power that they have and will report everything that comes into them, whether it's in person or online, and make sure that perpetrators are reported to the police, that there is a wider dissemination of the pattern of hate speech that they face, in order that those that are interested in Italy can build a picture. And if it doesn't result in prosecutions, then certainly lawmakers can look at what's going on and hopefully in the future redress those concerns. And I think it's the same in many other territories. It's definitely the case, I think, in increasingly in the way in which we see online hate speech. All of the governing bodies of football internationally, so UEFA and FIFA, and then increasingly at a national level, now use monitoring services to monitor hate speech against their national teams, against football clubs. So it's now at sort of a flourishing area where we can identify where hate speech is coming from, which territories it's coming from, what the characteristics of that hate speech is. And then there have even been examples in Europe of police prosecutions of people who live in other territories and have sat at home and sent out a tweet or a Facebook post that is hateful, usually on the basis of someone's gender or race. But that also counts with someone like Alphonso Davies, for example, or Nadia Nadim, who is a very high profile refugee footballers, and often are subject to hateful conduct. So I think we have to make sure that we realize that there is a law out there, there is a framing of the law, and we have to use it to its maximum capabilities. And then I think those that are responsible for governing sport often have a responsibility that they don't realize. I've given good examples of UEFA and FIFA and some Western European associations, but this should be the case everywhere. Everybody should do a risk analysis when their club or national team plays, particularly at a high level, elite level sports. We should understand that there will be a kickback, there will be hateful speech, and how do we then deal with that? And then I think there are, when I talk about community mobilizations, I think some of the most powerful things I've seen are when, we know that there is such a thing on Twitter as a pylon. You know, when there is somebody says something and people then jump on board to support that negative comment. And the same way, there are other ways which we can protect people. We can ask if people are okay if they've been victims of hate speech. We can make sure that there are networks of support. And the beauty of sport, I think, is the structure that we have with sports clubs. A sports club is an extended family. It's a place of safety. And then I think we can use that family scenario in order to protect people, to give them counseling and guidance and support when they need it. So some very generalized examples there, but I think nothing of the kind that Katie's talking about. But I think there is now a growing movement of understanding hate speech, the impact that it has on people in terms of their mental health, and the impact that it has on community cohesion, on people living together, and therefore the interventions that we need to mobilize to protect against it. And that is why, again, I think in one of the breakout sessions when we talk about online hate speech, I personally will be focusing on the way in which we need to hold platforms, social media platforms, to account, and how do we do that? That's a really big question, because if we don't do that, then I think we're just stuck in a cycle of hate speech occurring, communities defending against it, and we're not addressing the systemic issues.
Yeah, great, thanks, PR. And there will be a breakout group on online hate speech. So if that is the topic that interests you, please do join that one. Coming to Katie, what potential do you see for collaboration with sports actors and forums to promote a joint approach, right, to combating hate speech and discrimination?
Thanks. I might just pick up on Piara's point about the holding platforms to account, and I'll drop into the chat. It was just something that sort of came to my mind. At the UN level, we now have principles on information integrity, which does also include sort of collective action on hate speech. And I do see that the more that we can sort of have you know, a collective voice for us to sort of go to the platforms and present, you know, our case consistently and coherently, look at ways in which we can sort of, you know, demonstrate the risks that exist on these platforms. I think that that's really important. And so the more unified we are in sort of that delivery of that response, and also thinking about, you know, how we can use our comparative advantages to expand the sort of diversity of voices that are being presented and able to advocate to the platforms, I think is really critical. And, you know, I think the UN world is wonderful at working in silos, and the more that we can do to really try and sort of bring those partnerships together, I think is critical. And then actually something that we've been trying to do on the sort of UNHCR side is think about how we can work much more with digital rights groups. And so maybe on the one hand, we can sort of bring in, you know, the experts who really are, you know, creating very targeted advocacy on a daily basis, looking at sort of how to hold some of the platforms accountable, with the sports for development partners who are sort of seeing it on the sort of community individual side, and bringing those voices together, I think is really important. Another thing as well that's actually in these principles is the importance of sort of healthy incentives, and actually really trying to sort of think not only what can we sort of talk about with the platforms, but maybe also the advertisers. And I think that that's also an interesting piece, but in the sports space as well. Do advertisers want to see their brand necessarily associated with hateful content? And I think that that's a really interesting piece if you think about it. If maybe sort of football, for example, is you know, deemed to be a space where there is toxicity, what can we also think about in terms of you know, encouraging the advertisers to also call for sort of cleaning up of the information ecosystem? This can be online, but also thinking sort of, you know, in the physical space as well. I'll share the guidelines. They were sort of quite recently released, but they do sort of talk about some very sort of collective actions that we could do together. And I think that there's a lot to sort of draw on in that sort of collaborative space when it comes to working with sports actors. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, thank you. And it's fitting, I think, that Warner Brothers will end the panel, perhaps with a, no, not a fairy tale ending, but Sandrine, over to you. And I mean, you know, people have touched on this, but how can sports actors and broadcasters like yourselves, you know, work alongside each other, right? Team up, like what you've done with the Refugee Olympic team, but I guess more broadly, team up to create a more respectful and inclusive environment for forcibly displaced people.
Well, I guess with our discussions with national federations and international federation, I think we need to put inclusion at the heart of the conversation. Like, I'd love to be able to use what we built with the IOC as a blueprint for working in the same way with other federations. And I think the conversations should start early. I mean, we obviously start from a business discussion between national or international federation because we are in the tender to acquire the rights from them. What we've done is, even right at the beginning in the tender process, when we start, we present who we are, and we do talk about WBD sports together and all our programs and our projects to get them on board and to get them excited and to tell them who they're entering a partnership with. And also, I guess as a media, we're also relying on the sports organization to share their stories with us. Then for sports organizations and federations that do have dedicated programs and are funding NGOs or being super active in their sports, they need to tell us their stories. And we can tell those stories. We can share them on our platforms. We can collaborate with them and amplify their stories. And for national federations or international federations that are not as developed yet in this field, we by presenting who we are and our values, we get the conversations going. And I think it takes some time, but it does happen and it changes. And we tell them that we have, for example, a partnership with Play International, that we just signed an agreement with the Euro Games, which are the LGBTQ plus games taking place soon. And we tell them those stories, and we tell them how they're part of our editorial tone and the stories we choose to tell, and it works. What matters to them is it works. Those stories get told, and they are interesting for people, and they do deliver numbers and audience.
Yeah.
So we have to keep doing. It's an educating process about it's putting human at the heart of what we do, and using our platforms to just tell stories.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks. And yeah, I think you make a really good point there. There's a human case, there's a human rights case, and then there's also, even a business case that you've said, around these stories really getting traction. So thank you so much. Thanks so much to the panelists. I think some really incredible insights there. We will now move quite swiftly into the breakout rooms. I hope everyone can see my screen, but we're going to have 3 different breakout rooms for about 15 minutes. Room 1 is how can sport organizations leverage partnerships? And that'll be Katie Drew and the supporting team from the SCORT Foundation. So select room 1 if that interests you. And number 2 will be how can sport organizations collaborate with the media? And Sandrine will lead this group with support from the Olympic Refuge Foundation. And room 3 will be with Piara around the rise of online hate speech towards refugees, supported by UNHCR. In each room, please have someone who helps take notes and choose someone who will come back to the plenary in 15 minutes to report back in 2 or 3 minutes, because we won't have a lot of time on what was discussed in your breakout room. If you do not select a breakout room, you will be allocated one. So yeah, please select your breakout room. If you have any questions, you can ask me or my colleague John Bartman for support. But let's start that process now to move into the breakout rooms, and let's come back to the plenary, John, in 15 minutes sharp, so that everybody can have a bit of time to report back before we close off. great. So please join a breakout room. Hopefully you are able to. And again, if you have any challenges, please just let us know.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I got kicked off out of the meeting. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. I see there's just a few people. Steve, George, and Edgar. Steve, George, and Edgar, you guys, can you hear me? Do you know which breakout room you'd like to join? Maybe they're not on. Not. Steve says 2. Okay, I'll do that quickly. And then there's George and Edgar.
George and Edgar, if you can hear me, this room is going to close for 15 minutes. And after that, you will be automatically, you will automatically rejoin this room. So we're going to assign you, Edgar's gone. George, we're going to assign you to room 1 now. We'll see you in 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. And then what are you going to do, John? Are you going to just stay here or
I'm going to join rooms 1 and 2. Which one do you want to be in? I'll do the other 2.
I don't mind too much. Let me go to yeah, I don't mind actually.
Okay,
let me go to room 1. Room 1 looks like it's got the least people, so
okay, you take room 1 and I'll take 2 and 3. See you in a bit.
Okay, cool.
There's a countdown timer after, well, it's a 15-minute room, so everyone automatically rejoins the main. There's a 2-minute countdown timer before the 15 minutes is up.
Okay, cool. Okay, nice one.
Then.
Okay, I think it's just our breakout room that has
Have we transported our
returned. Go for it, Anna.
We can just keep talking. Yeah, maybe we're just we're the model students. You know, those students that always like first back, bought the teacher an apple. That's us.
One thing that this group should maybe decide is there's someone who wants to report back to the plenary, just on this breakout group.
We already volunteered.
Oh, you did. Sorry.
Anna.
I was,
No, actually,
yes, I was voluntold.
Okay.
I think we left an awkward silence until someone filled it, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. It's good. It's always good practice as a facilitator to just let things really sit until someone caves.
I was told that once. I was told never nominate, like never call someone out, but just keep asking the question until the space just becomes so painful that someone steps up.
Absolutely.
I was going to pick on you as the other UNHCR. I thought that would be the fairest thing to do, but then I wanted there not to be, too monotone a UNHCR voice. So I'm glad Anna jumped in.
Okay, great. I see people are rejoining from the other breakout groups. Okay, we're just waiting. I think maybe one of the breakout groups is still coming back. I see people are coming back into the plenary as we speak. Okay. We don't have a lot of time left, so I think let's jump into the feedback from the breakout groups. So the first breakout group was how can sports organizations leverage partnerships to better combat hate speech, and I believe Anna is going to present back from that. So if you could just keep it to 2 or 3 minutes, Anna, that would be great.
Great. We'll keep it concise. So yeah, we started a little bit talking about a little bit of the work that our own organizations did. And then we talked a bit about how working in partnerships can be challenging and kind of starting there. And from there, we built off it to, okay, there are obviously challenges to working in partnership, but really what are the opportunities and how can we build on those with the understanding that it's not always easy to put together. And so a few different things that came up within that was how many different experiences and skill sets you can bring to the table if you do work in partnership. We're a small grassroots organization, so kind of working in, so we called it the bigger ecosystem, could bring context, experiences, capacities. And then we talked about a few specific examples with the organizations in the room about, if someone has more inroads with the tech platforms, as we've talked about all the opportunities and challenges of the tech world in this context. And then also around clubs, like the sport clubs or things like that. So really looking at it as partnerships as a chance to really amplify the work and help both parties or all parties, if it's multi-sector, to reach more people, or have deeper impact.
Great.
Did I forget any team?
Thanks, Anna. I think I was in part of that group, so that sounded great. And yeah, I think the challenges and more importantly, as you said, the opportunities of working in partnership that they present. Group 2, Sandrine's group on how can sports organizations collaborate with the media. I'm not sure who's reporting back from there.
I'll take this.
Mainly,
we didn't.
2-3 minutes, Alfonso.
Yeah. So yeah, we started talking about how can we. Well, ultimately, it was the role of the broadcasters and media organizations to tell stories. I think that's very much at the center of much of what Sandrine was talking about, is that they want to tell stories, and beyond the kind of the 90 minutes of coverage of the football game or the the cycling race or whatever it might be, they need to tell stories, right? And something that came up very strongly was the power of athletes as storytellers and advocates for this and ambassadors for these causes, but also other opportunities. So, for example, working with football clubs, for example, Khalida talked about, and clubs like Chelsea Football Club who work with Lucy Bronze or Football Club Barcelona. So finding these kind of linkages to not only the sport event that is happening, but also other initiatives that may be happening and working and making sure that the media organizations are aware of these stories and bringing them to them, because they, beyond the kind of initial broadcast, you know, they need to fill airtime ultimately, and they need to fill column spaces, etc. So how can we find these stories? And then I think something that came up as perhaps a challenge was, beyond these kind of less visible moments or locations. So Mahmoud was talking about the region that he's working in the Middle East. How do we, you know, perhaps there isn't, you know, that high profile athlete that can be engaged, for example, or there might not be the high profile event. So discussing those challenges about how we draw attention to perhaps less represented or less visible areas. I think one of the things that we didn't discuss, but perhaps this is something that could, a thought that we had was around, or that I had was around the grant, and how that could be used perhaps to sort of leverage this.
Yeah, great, thanks. And you know, I think grassroots actors are heroes too. You know, I think the true heroes of sport for development are often the coaches on the ground working in the communities day in, day out. So, and just to say, we welcome, I mean, you know, please submit your articles and stories to Sport and Dev, right? You know, there's some stories that have come out here, there's some insights that have come in there, get published, share them with the world. And, you know, that's one way to do something. And we encourage you just to get your voice out there as well. Coming to group 3, Piara, not sure who's reporting back from the online hate speech group, Raza.
Yes, I think I'm going to be the one who's going to present. So we started on talking about how actually online hate targeting refugees has significantly increased for the past 10-15 years, particularly with the rise of social media platforms. And we touched upon like what are the key characteristics of this hate, and we want to, you know, deep down. But yeah, we had lots of questions, you know, starting with, and also how we can translate these campaigns towards tackling hate speech into more like tangible and real world action. And we came into a discussion that it's a very open and urgent question, which we can all work together on. But one of the point was that actually like global campaigns are important, but we must focus on how to, you know, translate this into more grassroots mobilization, as you just said, Ben, and particularly focused on the football communities, like supporting refugees and working with grassroots communities, and also that community-based clubs should be playing a crucial role, and engaging like football fans in that area and communities are important. And we also, you know, had come up to this question, how can we motivate fan groups to show solidarity and actively support refugee integration as well? And Hani was saying that perhaps we can, you know, engage athletes, and they have incredible influence over like social media, Instagram, Facebook, and particularly over younger audiences, which we can actually, you know, engage. And they look at the athletes as a role models with million followers, and we need to educate them as well, you know, to not have the same situation over the years. And yeah, we can leverage their platforms to promote a positive and inclusive narrative. As well, there was a mentioning of like having kind of a reliable resource hub that we can, you know, counter misinformation and disinformation about refugees, doing that. Also, there was a discussion that perhaps we could, you know, support more local initiative over global ones, and that's the insight which Julia got from her work with professional football clubs, and how they, you know, have coach trainings with children there. And yeah, and John came up with some of the, you know, important information regarding that we can, you know, have some educational platforms, or like have a teaching course on technical skills that we can, you know, integrate and ensure that they have a very, you know, good overview of what's not to do, and how we can actually like tackle hate speech in these areas. So yeah, that's from our side. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute to go. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Zua, Anna, and Alfonso for being brief and providing a really good overview of all those different groups. And we're coming to the end of our time together, and we don't want to keep you too much longer, but I just want to thank everyone really for joining today. We know there's a lot of webinars and workshops happening around the world, but I think this was a really inspiring and insightful discussion. Thanks so much to Katie and to Sandrine for being all-star panelists and really, engaging and sharing your insights, for supporting the breakout rooms as well. Thanks so much to the team from SCORT Foundation, Julia and Tanya, Colette, Zua, and the UNHCR team, and then, Andy, Alfonso, Mavi, the team from the Olympic Refuge Foundation. And there is a grant opportunity that you can apply for. You can contribute to the Sport and Dev and SfRC call for articles in multiple languages. And please get involved in the Week of Action, and share your stories and your voices. As we said earlier, the need has never been greater. The challenges, we really are living in tumultuous and troubled times. And we really, this is a time to come together and stand up, right, for those that are forcibly displaced. And sport can do better. Sport should do better. And sport can support displaced people to lead healthier lives and be more integrated into their communities. And that responsibility sits with all of us. And with the freedom that many of us may have comes great responsibility, as my compatriot Nelson Mandela once said. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for making the time. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to all the audience members for all your contributions. We will share a recording of the webinar on Sport and Dev. All these insights and inputs will be collated and will be taken to the high-level officials meeting, which we said at the beginning. So hopefully there will be some way in which these are used to inform policy and advocacy decisions. And we encourage you to remain involved. And thank you so much again for joining us today and for your time. And kosi kakulu, bye danki, merci beaucoup, muchas gracias. And we will see you soon. Maybe if everyone wants to turn on their cameras, maybe my colleague John can get a screenshot of all of us. And we can use that for an article. So if everyone's happy with that, maybe turn on your cameras, say goodbye, and thank you so much again for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, great. I think